right. Hello and welcome to this live session for the Data for Subscriptions podcast. I'm your host, Berat Bonyan, and I have a great pleasure of welcoming Stefan Liozu to the show today. Welcome, Stefan.
Thanks. Good to be here.
It's a bit early morning for you on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. What time is it for you?
It's 9 a.m. It's late for me.
It's even late for you.
Yeah.
Appreciate you taking the time. So, Stefan, before we get started, I just want to mention to everybody who signs up and logs into the session today, that you can drop your questions into the chat box at any moment that you'd like. We'll make sure to pick up your questions along the way, or we'll take them at the end when we have a Q&A session. So feel free to add your questions there. All right. So today's topic, guys, is usage-based pricing, what it is and how we go about them. So why don't we start, Stefan, would you give us a first introduction of what is usage-based pricing?
Well, first of all, it's a phenomenon that's right now is popping up right and left. But it's very, in a simple definition, is really charging for what your consumer or customers are using. So there's different names for it. There's pay-per-use, there is flexible consumption models, there is usage-based pricing. But at the end of the day, very simply put, it's pay for what you use, and avoid paying too much or a flat fee that, sometimes doesn't, is not affordable for what you use. So that's a very simple concept.
So we're going to dig into the specifics of it. We're going to talk about how you approach it in the best way and how do you mitigate some of the challenge. But what I wanted to start with is let's talk pricing in itself and pricing
Mhm.
psychology. In my view, usage-based pricing provides us a means of a much more sophisticated and a continuously adapted way of pricing what we offer to consumers. What I've observed myself is, for example, it lowers the barrier for adoption for what we offer. It also is perceived typically as fairer. If I
Mhm.
consume a lot, I pay for it. If I consume less or stop consuming, I don't pay for it. So it's quite intuitive why we as consumers perceive consumption-based pricing or usage-based pricing a good approach. But I wanted to get your take as a pricing expert. How should we think about pricing as a lever towards our customers?
Well, so you raise a very good point. Usage-based pricing is very, very customer-centric, um, and it's a bit less company centric, or and we get into this a little bit later. But if you really want to be close to your customers or the consumers, then you really understand what they do, how much they use, how they use, when they use, and match your pricing metric to what's called the value metric, which is really how do customers count per movie, per click, per kilobyte, you name it. So obviously you need to do it well, but you truly need to understand your consumers and customers in B2B, and match your pricing model to that. So it's very friendly, and as well it evolves with the usage patterns of your customers, consumers. This is why we need a maturity model, because in some industry, in some sectors, consumers are getting much more sophisticated. They want to buy sometimes per magazine or per article or even per link. So you have to be able to follow your consumer patterns. And the opposite of that is pricing that's very inflexible, or I would say static. And more today, as consumers are changing their purchasing behaviors, they look at some of these models as antiquated. And as you think about the next generation of like Generation Z's and the one after that, they just use a lot, and they just want to be free. Let's put it this way: if you want to be free, I click here, I pay. I don't click, I don't pay. It's so the concept of a kind of a hybrid of a freemium with a usage model is much more appropriate for them.
Right. So we exemplified numerous of the consumer type services now. Do you see a difference when it comes to consumption-based pricing between B2B, business to business, versus B2C?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, in the B2B world, it's just starting. I mean, in some manufacturing sectors, the pay-per-use has been in existence for a while. In the B2C world, we've been using usage-based pricing for a long time. In banks, with telecom companies, and even healthcare. So it's not new. So a lot of consumers are already used to see bills when they can make sense out of them, because you remember the good old days where we get telecom bills that we try to understand them, but that's a different topic. But we've been using usage-based models for a long time in B2C. B2B now is starting to take off. And the reason for that is, the amount of competition in the software space, and many companies are investing in the SaaS model, and they realize that, gee, I have 20 competitors that are doing the same subscription, so I need to kind of change that. And then a lot of pushback from consumer customers in B2B. So it's not at the level of B2C, but it's coming. It's increasing steadily.
Okay, let's dive right into it, because you have developed quite an intuitive maturity model for how to go about introducing usage-based pricing. You want to walk us through first, how does it look like, your model?
Well, so the model is, first of all, based on a lot of discussions and a lot of reading around business, usage-based pricing models, the business model, the operating model, and the pricing model. And really, it's a traditional five-step maturity model, from very simple to the very, very advanced, the future state, I would say. And what's important to understand is, with the maturity model, is that it's sequential, and really, especially when we get into complex advanced pricing, which I consider usage-based pricing a more complex pricing strategy and pricing model. Then you have to go slowly but surely, making sure that you become mature before you get to the next level. So level one starts with a very simple subscription model with some maybe insignificant or very small consumption components, like add-ons or services or per hour professional consulting services. So, but the fundamental model in that level one is the subscription, and then you start playing around with things that could be moved into usage. So imagine that, but a lot of companies still don't do subscription. So it's not like you can go from, hey, I'm selling equipment or product or services one time in a transactional fashion, to go all the way to level three. So you got to start getting very familiar with recurring models, and then eventually introduce things outside of your subscription. So you may have a flat fee per month, but you may have additional, you buy services or support hours, or tickets, or so that's the basic. Then you
Right.
get into really the next step is quite a big jump, where you already introduce usage components into your subscription. So you may have the subscription model uh, by sales revenue or volume or transaction, where you would have a hybrid model with a subscription component and a usage component. So and that already is a big step,
Yeah.
because you truly need to understand now the consumer even more, the customers, and start paying attention to data, because that's where it's not a simple bill every month. It's a simple bill, but you have to count, you have to measure, you have to meter, you have to
Right.
make sure the data is right. So it really starts with introducing the complexity of your. So generally speaking, here you would have a single metric. You would have one metric, usage metric, that you will introduce in your hybrid model, and it could be a number of hours, or a number of sessions, but it's very simple. So, but I don't mean it's simple in a way that you got to, it's simple to get done. It's kind of simple to design and conceptualize. The level three is, again, another big jump when you get into multi-metric. But so from you to your consumer, your customers, then you offer now the possibility to invoice and bill based on several metrics. Now that introduced a huge complexity, not only on data gathering and making sure the data is high quality to be able to invoice, right, and to count in a good way. But also, you have to have a way to put the multiple metrics in your in your software, right?
Right.
So here, why do you move from single metric to multi-metric? Is really you want to differentiate yourself from competitors, and you also maybe respond to the customer request for, hey, it's not fair that you charge me per document, where I have, I invoiced my customers by hours or by document or by report. Why should I only pay you per document? So this is a type of discovery you would do before. Obviously, you design your pricing model by doing customer interviews, truly understand the value metric the customers require, and prioritizing them. And you may think that one is not good enough, but that
Yeah.
is one way, right? So you get into I have consumer and customers, and I sell to them in a multi-metric usage-based pricing model. That's level three.
Before we jump to level
Yeah,
4, because already
yeah,
on level 3, there's a significant amount of complexity that is being
yeah,
introduced. Because just to state maybe the obvious for you, but it could be good for anybody listening to hear you explain it. If we look at it from a metric perspective, another way to say that you want to introduce as many ways for your customers to conveniently consume and pay for what they consume.
yeah,
So, in theory, you want to be able to, if you work with business development or marketing at a firm, you want to be able to provide as many options as possible, because that might be the best way to cater for all of your customers' needs. The
correct.
challenge then is that for every new metric that you introduce, it's a significant increase
Yeah.
of complexity. Is that the case?
Yes, correct, correct. So not only on the, so you could design it easily on paper on Excel, but then you have to include that in your entire tech stack, and
Right.
this is where it gets very complicated. And what you're trying to avoid is manual work, right? And multi-counting, and and what happens if it changes in between. So it introduces another level of you know um, yes, complexity, but capabilities that your firm is going to have to consider in accounting, in billing, in and if it doesn't work well, you'll see significant revenue leakage, which is something that you want to avoid. And then you need to be credible in front of your customers. You need to make sure that you work well, you have transparency in your invoicing, in your billing, and you don't spend hours and hours dealing with customer calls that say, hey, I don't understand what you billed me,
Got
and
it.
doesn't seem right. So
Got it.
so it's I would say every jump in the maturity model is a significant jump. So if you only do a single-sided type of relationship where you sell to your customers or consumer, and you would potentially stop at level 3, but keeping in mind that if you have a deep customer segmentation process, you may do things from level 1, 2, and 3 at once. And that's even more complex than what you said before, because now you may have a very advanced group of sophisticated customers that want multi-metric usage, and they want to only pay clearly for what they use, and they'll tell you very quickly. But you may have a group of customers that are price buyer, where you would just do a flat subscription.
Right.
Now, as you get into good, better, best, and you get into different bundles and functional bundles, it's the complexity is, you multiply the complexity tenfold, because now you manage multiple model, some of them usage based, some of them subscription based or
Yeah.
transactional based, and now everybody in your IT team and your accounting team is going, poof.
Understood.
And
Yeah,
so
we're going to get into I think both the
yeah,
tech stack, as you refer to, or quote to cash process in the back
yeah,
end in a minute, which is going to be exciting. But why don't we touch level 4 and 5, which we didn't get to quickly as
yeah.
well, and then we'll get back into the tech stack related.
So 4 and 5, we get into more of a platform type of move away a little bit from the SaaS to more of a platform as a service when you do,
Yeah,
really multi-sided platform and you have multi-metrics, multi-channels. So you may sell through different channels, through different type of customers, and it's two ways. So you have to be able to count and measure not only what you buy, what you sell, how you transact, and that is even more complex as you can imagine, because you have to have an engine that can not only count what you buy, what you sell, the transactions among a very large potential group of so an Airbnb, for example, could be a good case
yeah,
for you need to make sure that you address all the stakeholders in your platform. So that's a whole different level of complexity, obviously, and the data that's required is tremendous.
yeah,
Right data, high quality data, to be able to invoice and count, because now you get paid by transaction. You're introducing another monetization tool, commission, transaction fees, access fees, plus a subscription, plus the usage. So the level of monetization sophistication is high.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what we need to get done and manage for to get this done, because
Yeah.
the upside and the appeal is quite clear. I think you well explained at the different stages why the case for it, because it's just simply a lot of things that need to work. I think we also shouldn't forget, but maybe for another day's conversation, that there's a whole host of organizational and competency, culturally related aspects as well when companies make this journey. But for today, as we're going to focus on the tech stack and the quote to cash, let's start talking about the aspect of data, because you mentioned that several times how important it is with data quality. But before we get to that specific question of data quality, oftentimes I find when we speak about these topics, we say data, but here we're
Mhm.
speaking specifically about customer usage data, or sometimes referred to as revenue data. Why is this so special, this type of data?
Well, first of all, you have a lot of data in your company, and it's a matter of finding the right data that you need specifically to funnel to be able to invoice accurately. And the data may be in multiple sources, and in different format languages, and you need to make sure it gets extracted and combined and enriched in a way that you can precisely invoice and count. And the last thing you want is being non-transparent. So the quality and the accuracy of data needs to be, from the very beginning of the process, needs to be the best of the best. And this is typically where I would already see a lot of breakdowns in companies' willingness and intention in using usage-based pricing and extracting the data. So it's so there is automated extraction and there is manual extraction and feeding into. So that's what we're trying to avoid. But I think it's at time, it depends on the complexity of a company. But let's say you acquire a bunch of companies, you put them together, you have multi systems, and now you have integrated your go-to-market with products, but then you have to find the data in a kind of a maze of systems. It's not easy. And the data doesn't come naturally. You got to funnel it to the right place. So this is why you have data analysts, scientists, and good forensic accountant that will go and find where is the data, how do I need to extract it and put it in the funnel. And the funnel is typically a data architecture that will, with a data highway that will go into the data intelligence hub, some kind of a digital route hub, and do what it needs to be go through to be able to then bill and the rest of the quote to cash process. So
Right.
extremely obviously important, because not only the quality but the precision, because what you don't want is have a million phone calls from your customers and say, what are you doing?
So if I would summarize why the complexity of this occurs, is because data, let's call it usage data in this case now, usage data comes and sits in many different places.
Correct.
Of course, it relates to the consumption of the customer, but it could also sit in anything from your CRS system, your ERP system, your billing system, and it needs to go back and forth. We're still providing a fairly simplified view when we're speaking about the quote to cash process, and being able to manage for all the different variations and formats of data where the systems need to speak to each other. Okay, so let me ask you the question of billing systems, because there is, I believe, a perception that, well, to solve for this, you have to address the billing system. And I like a quote that I actually have in front of me now that I picked up from you. Billing systems need to adapt to innovative pricing models, not the other way around. What do you mean by that?
Well, so usually, as you evolve in your pricing maturity, you've started with a very simple billing system, and maybe have upgraded, graduated to a more advanced one. But there's billing systems that are excellent for subscription, and that level 1 or 2 of a single metric of the maturity model. But when you get into the multi-metric and you get into level 4, it's not appropriate, and a lot of the time they're not native systems. So you would take a company that acquires a bunch of other companies, and they put them together and trying to solve the usage-based formula, but it's very not well integrated, and you have a lot of connectors and APIs, and so so depending on where you are on the maturity model. And we didn't even talk about level 5, which is the metaverse, cyber secured, Web3 type of token, multi-channel, multi-metric. So this is advanced billing system, because you really need to have a blockchain and capability to do digital wallets and advanced payment. So not every billing system is gonna be able to go to the higher level of maturity. And a bit of my frustration is they all claim that they do consumption pricing or usage-based pricing, but which one? Because there's definitely multi maturity levels. And so to answer your question, then a lot of the time the creativity in pricing and monetization is constrained by the billing system, and it's unfortunate, because first of all, if you manage to respond to the customer needs, it creates a huge amount of frictions internally, which generally speaking prevents fast scaling. So
Right.
companies that are good candidates for usage-based pricing, they want to scale fast in automatic way without friction. And my experience is it doesn't happen if you're constrained by the billing system. And then that then you have to spend quite a bit of time readjusting manual interactions, finding the data, cleaning the data. So really, you really need to evaluate billing system and use the right one based on what you're trying to achieve.
Now, this is also something that I share from the experience I have, is that billing systems, maybe to some obvious, but it seems it's not fully clear to the masses. Billing systems were never built to manage for this kind of sophisticated pricing models. I think there's a misconception perhaps that it can, but what it ends up doing is that it then adds a tremendous amount of OpEx costs, where you have to do a lot of engineering, if we call it that, to make sure that it works. There's a lot of manual labor and steps involved, and still that ends up being quite error prone. So there's definitely better ways of doing it. There are some best-in-class companies that are already doing it. Of course, some of them who we work with, but of course there are others as well that are doing it without necessarily digital route being involved. But those are the ones who have, to come to the point, those are the ones who understood that managing the usage data flow across the quote to cash system is imperative.
Yeah.
Once you manage to get your head and hands around that, then you can already leverage many times your existing quote to cash stack, if you will, as is, or at least not having to take on massive transformation projects, which of course is costly but also risky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not to
So
talk about the
that's
timing aspect.
That's a good point. So right now the billing space is very innovative, and you have a lot of new companies coming out to address that complex side of the usage-based pricing spectrum, and it's very promising. But the vast majority of the market is traditional subscription and level one of usage-based pricing. This is where you see the biggest penetration of usage-based pricing. Now, if I'm a billing system company today and I don't have the capabilities and data, I go to partner very quickly with digital route. I don't, make my own system, because it's not as easy as we think to get the data and put it in an environment that is appropriate to bill and to collect. So don't reinvent the wheel. There's companies that specializes in that, and your company is one of them. And just do a partnership and plug it in, plug the engine in, um, and get going. But I think it's at the end of the day, it's all about customer satisfaction. And if you match your customer value metric, how do they buy, what do they use, and you do that very very high quality data, I mean, you're in good shape. And so don't improvise with the data intelligence engine. Use a company that does that for a living.
Yeah. Let's take some questions, Stefan. There were some that have come in, and let's see if more we'll do before we get to kind of do a good summary for our audience here. The first question is the future usage-based or hybrid-based business model?
So it depends on who you read and what you read. I would say for me, it's hybrid, hybrid with an increased level of complexity, um, and it's even more hybrid as far as price. So the single pricing model will be more hybrid, but as you go into customer segmentation, as I mentioned, the level of complexity and what I call hybridity or hybridity increases, because you have to have multiple pricing model for segments, and you can't force advanced usage models to companies that just don't have the first of all the usage, second of all the sophistication. And remember, some CFOs and your customers may not want to have usage-based pricing, because then they fear the predictability. So at the end of the day, the complexity increases at all level, and you got to be ready for it.
So another question that came in, perhaps, I mean, you already answered that to some extent, but it's good to repeat it based on these questions. For hybrid model, which level does that fall into based on your five
So
levels that you described?
so it starts at one, and it never stops.
Okay.
But remember, this maturity model it's really not limited in the hybrid design. You could have a multi-metric that's 100% usage. So it's in essence that is not hybrid. But you could have a multi-metric with an access fee, a subscription access fee with two metrics and a bunch of add-ons that are also usage based. So each level will have a different level of hybridity, or hybridity. I think I'm making up that word, but but we're moving towards a lot more hybrid model, and the design of it. This is where we get into monetization innovation, which now you're able to design things. Imagine you moving into level 4, which is a platform, multi-sided platform, and you really reap the benefit of your platform by collecting fees and subscriptions and usage fees, and you don't leave money on the table because your data is available and your billing system can handle this.
Yeah. No, I second that. I think the term of hybrid is fairly recent. I probably noticed more and more conversation around hybrid around 2 years back, I would say. Maybe it
Mhm.
started earlier, but that it became more prominent in, let's say, in the industry. Sometimes hybrid is used for many different means. For example, a company that is just doing traditional sales, but is stepping into subscriptions as well on top of continuing with their, let's say, 50-year-old core business of selling a
Mhm.
product plus traditional support, they call that hybrid.
Correct.
Naturally, as you explained, hybrid means that you're providing some form of a flat fee plus variations on top of.
Mhm.
I think if we go with that definition, most likely hybrid is the end all be all, but it comes in many different flavors and
Yeah.
sophistications.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And companies that are very traditional companies already did. They sell engines and then they sell maintenance contracts and service contracts.
Yeah,
That's already hybrid. But I agree with
absolutely.
you. But I think when you focus on pricing model being hybrid, it's I think it's different. And the future will be a lot more outcome based than usage based or the combination of both. So you see industries already moving to outcome based pricing, which also needs the usage component.
Yeah, that's a great point, though. I think that's a very important point because we should separate between usage-based pricing and outcome-based at itself. Okay, we have another good question coming in here. How can business-to-business software companies determine if usage-based pricing is something they should consider at all?
Well, first of all, listen to your customers. They'll tell you. Uh, and when they start churning, when you start losing customers, right now the SaaS growth has slowed down and customers are starting to really reconsider subscriptions, then you need to be ready to offer an alternative. And maybe your company is not ready to move to usage based, but you know what? You may have to be ready with an alternative and tell your internal CFO or CEO, hey, we have no choice because we're starting to churn and customers are starting to churn and we can't retain them. So more customers and consumers are going to ask for usage. And you see that already in what's called the subscription fatigue phenomenon on the consumer side. Um, so that's the first trigger. The second is your competitors are moving fast and furious with pure usage-based model, and then here you are left standing with your traditional subscription, which may be used or not. So depending on the adoption level, so it's then you don't want to be left on your own with, and you will see very quickly your subscription rates being challenged. And number three is markets are changing. Markets are changing. There is disruption right and left, and I think being ready with hybrid model is something that a company should do, because more and more we're talking about outcome recurring business models, and the world is changing us at fast speed. So you see some industries, for example, like entertainment, and media and music, totally being disrupted in a matter of 5 years, away from buying to using. Why would not that be the case in your industry? You could argue.
Absolutely. I'll just expand on it from a B2B perspective, whether it is related to the different companies that we engage with from digital route. In fact, I could even reflect on it from my own perspective because we're going through some form of optimization in the company as well due to the economic climate. What happens? Well, we pay for lots of different licenses for our tech stack, and they are typically very traditional. You pay for 10 seats, and what happens when you're supposed to reduce cost? You go down to 5 seats. Now, imagine if there would be a more adaptive pricing model, which is what we've been discussing here today
Mhm.
with usage-based. Then it's not that crude 5 or 10 seats. It's more based on usage. Now, that today for many of the license providers is not the case. Now, even in many of the cases with huge manufacturing companies that we discuss with from Digital Route, it's more or less the same.
Mhm.
At extreme high levels of, let's say, business and software for whether it's construction or manufacturing processes, it is still the same logic. So I can definitely see that even in that more traditional industry where it's moving, to your point, Stefan, whereas we've seen this shift obviously more in the consumer space because of
Mhm.
content media, but it is coming.
Yeah, it's and and right now the limitation really is being able to forecast usage, and you start seeing billing systems providing that forecast intelligence, because that's where customers and consumers, maybe customers on the B2B, they need to have a little bit of predictability in usage, and if you have an engine that can do that for them based on the historical data, that's you're a winner.
And I was meaning to ask you this question a little bit later after the Q&A part, but let me ask it now because we've spoken about a lot of the upsides of usage-based pricing.
Mhm.
And you've, of course, spoken about the challenges of getting there. So, but one specific question is, are there any downsides with usage-based pricing? And to kind of not to ask too much of a leading question, the one that you mentioned now is one of the areas that I typically hear as a bit of a fear, because you
Yeah.
don't have the same predictability. Or is this the only one? Do you see other downsides?
Well, so if you do some reading on the pros and cons on usage-based pricing, on the con side, you'll see obviously the internal complication. The
Of
fact
course,
that you might need to do some manual work, and the tech stack is not following. So
of course.
another one is indeed the predictability of the usage, and do you rely on what the customer is telling you, or do you have a forecasting engine that can do that because you do have the data? So it's predictability. Another one is Salesforce compensation. When you move towards usage, there's lots of complication in that aspect. But most of when I help companies to do that transition, the transition is not easy, and that that good saying that the culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, it happens in that transition as well. A lot of pushback, a lot of change management, a lot of courage to change your tech stack. And is your product can your product be packaged in a different way? Are can you do some gatekeeping? And I mean, it's huge implications. And a lot of time I go in companies and they think it's easy, and then they kind of they ask some questions about, do we do this or not? But it changes the game. It changes your company's DNA. And but at the end of the day, it's an innovation, and you're here if the customers and the consumers are asking for it. You have no choice.
Yeah. We'll take a few more questions, Stefan, before we summarize our conversation for today. So one question here is, understanding bills on usage has been an issue for B2B. Talk to any engineer trying to explain AWS bills to finance department to find out. How do you solve for this one?
Well, so yeah, but it's back to what I was saying before. You can't do all that work and go to finance and then expect to understand out of the blue what usage is, and now they look at bills and like, I have no clue, I don't know. So it is a change of culture. It is about, so when I do the work, I do that in a multifunctional manner, and I bring everybody in, including finance, and I really show them what usage is all about and how it looks differently on bills, on paperwork, on sales and general conditions, on the legal side. And it's much more integrative, which means you have a better chance at explaining because we know already. So you cannot do a usage-based pricing transition without finance being involved, not only on the buying side, but also on the selling side. And it's a change of mindset for sure. But I agree, some of the bills are too complex, and simplicity is the name of the game in usage-based pricing. Transparency and simplicity.
Got it. Next question is, are there any value metrics that are particularly well suited for usage-based?
Yes, there is, and that's the one that the customer want. And uh, frankly, it takes a little bit of a voice of customer research and truly understand the value metric or value metrics that the customer care about. If you ask the customer, they probably don't know, but you really have to look at how they consume, how do they think, what's important in their P&L, how do they communicate to their customers. So you want to be fully aligned as much as possible. So I want to maybe advise the audience not to always go back to one metric, and to think about in terms of several metrics, even if you only use one to begin with. There is no doubt different metrics that the customer is thinking in terms of, right? And in the language and the day-to-day, vocabulary of customers. Find them and validate them, and don't rely on just the internal point of view. So, like Steve Blank will say, get out of the building and talk to customers and do some
Mm.
research, and come back with options, and then you validate them. And any pricing changes will require some testing and validation, and make sure that you don't upset your customers. So you really have to know them.
All right, Stefan, my final question to you then from me, we've said a lot of good things during this conversation today. If I'm now a customer in a specific business, either considering to step into the first level of providing subscription-based, usage-based type, or if I've been testing a little bit, what is your advice to me how I can basically take the right steps so that I set myself up for success? What are the three things that you would send me off with?
Well, the first one would be revisit your segmentation and revisit your customer insights and get to the bottom of these. Right now, things have changed dramatically in the COVID and the supply chain crisis, and now the third bang, which is inflation. You have to get closer again to your customer population and truly understand what's going on there, changing patterns. The second one is I'd always like to do an assessment of your capabilities as far as, are you ready for usage-based pricing? You are ready internally with your tech stack, so an inventory of the tech stack, looking at, for example, can you feature gate your product? Because if you segment and you have now multiple things that can be based on consumption, can be bought based on consumption, then you have to be able to change your product. And a lot of companies have built products that are so big that they cannot version it. So that, I go through these, look at the products, look at the R&D, the engineering, and the tech stack, and look at, hey, are we ready for something like this or not? That includes also the quote to cash technology stack. Can I invoice? Can I bill? Can I collect? Can I get paid? Online, etc. And then the third one would be for everybody to speak the language of pricing. And I do quite a bit of training to explain the trend, what's going on, why, how is that differentiating for your company? Why do you need to do it now? Who does that in the market? And that creates a sense of credibility and security within the teams. Because if you only have a couple people doing that on their own and they want to introduce that to the rest of the organization, it's just very complicated to accept it. So, so that I start with this, and a good assessment, understanding the voice of customer, and then really doing some basic training. That sets you up for then a roadmap. And you realize that the companies they want to go to level 3 of the maturity model when they're not even ready for level 1. So I'm like, hey, slow down here, and we're not talking 2 years. We're talking 3 to 6 months. Let's start looking at the fundamentals of your business.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stefan. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate all of the insights that you've shared with us. And thank you to everybody listening. That takes it towards the end for today. Thanks so much, everybody. See you next time.
Take care, everybody.